Hello, something a little bit different today. Why? Because it's a car, it doesn't fly. But before we get into it, a quick reminder to please like or dislike this video if you didn't like it, comment, subscribe, click the bell thing which will tell you when I'm doing uploads, and always recycle your plastic bags because at least most of those will really help me out. But back into this beastie. What this is a 1/10 scale four-wheel drive car. And the reason I decided to go with this is because A, I get to fulfill my childhood dreams. Also, it's so cheap. This was like £57, under 60 quid. Obviously there's way more expensive ones which are high spec. But the fact, this looked like it was waterproof, it was ready to run. It seems to go quite fast, you get everything in it. I thought was like really cool. So let's open it up, shall we? See what's in there. Well, there's the manual. And there's a box inside this box. Look at that beastie, it's huge. There seems to be some cable ties holding bits in, so let's start cutting. Okay, that's the actual thing itself. But also in here, well, I eventually won that fight, and we've got here the sort of typical car controller with the steering wheel, trigger to go forward and reverse. Got a couple of speed modes here, and I think there's some sort of dual rate on it as the controller. And there's this box inside which contains one of these little chargers. This is a it works on a 2S little balance port with a 10 volt input here, and you've got this which has a European plug, which is different to UK for the people outside Europe or the UK. We all use different ones. But this is multi-voltage, so you can put it in an adapter. You can obviously plug something more normal in there, or you can just use a dedicated LiPo charger. Also, there was this little bag. It's got this little tool for getting the wheel nuts off. It's got a bunch of these little clips that hold the canopy, not canopy in this case, the body shell on, and some little battery connector with a switch. Don't know what that is. So if we take these clips out, very just light regular body shell, they really weren't messing around when they said it was waterproof. It's a completely sort of sealed unit here with just the receiver here, and you seem to have, maybe that's where the battery goes. Yep. In here is a 1600 milliamp hour LiPo 2-cell with a Dean's connector. Goodness, don't see many of them these days. It's quite a specific looking size, I have to say. I do like the way this is all sealed in. I mean, at the moment it's absolutely a nightmare just on grass and stuff. Everything is wet. The fact this is waterproofed is really cool. Lots of suspension on here. You can see the differentials working. It's got a little note here saying about always turn the power off, always disconnect the battery. Makes sense. Well, I'm super excited. I'm gonna get this battery charged up, have a quick squiz through the manual, see if there's anything to know about, and then we can take this out for a drive because it really doesn't care what the weather's like. That's cool. Reading through the manual, it said to drive the first battery on just a flat surface to set the brushes, so up and down my road for 15 minutes, being quite bored in low speed mode. But after that I decided to take it out to the park, and I started again just in low speed mode to see how it felt. And it didn't feel like, you know, the grass was slowing it down too much. So I came back and I put it into high speed mode. Excitement. And it really did make a difference. I mean, unfortunately, the GoPro being such a wide angle sort of slows everything down. It doesn't look much faster, but it really was, to the point of, you know, it fell over and stuff when you tried to stop. So I chose this place because I thought it was quite a typical place where, you know, kids or the likes of me might sort of take a little car like this, just roam around on a bit of a field where you've got cut grass. It's not super short. It gets wet and damp, especially, you know, in the morning or in the winter where it's all a bit grubby here. But, you know, this thing did really well. Sort of just going around, jumping up and down the little bumps I could find, and just basically hurtled up and down the field. Now, this thing said it's got range to about 80 metres. Now, when I first heard that, I thought, well, that's a bit limiting. What can I do? And of course, this is a 1/10 scale car, and as soon as it's, you know, 50 metres away, it's a tiny dot. So, in terms of
what its usage is, that's, you know, spot on for what you want, really. You don't need something that's going to go a kilometre when you can't see it. But the control felt really good. The steering wheel was nice and sensitive enough to drive around. The high-speed version, when you're full throttle and you slam it straight into a corner on any sort of paved or tarmac roads, this thing will just slide and sort of, you know, drift. As soon as you go on something that's a bit more grippy, like grass, in high-speed mode, that's enough to tip it, so you have to be a little bit careful there. I kind of enjoyed the driving in terms that as it sort of skipped around and stuff, you know, you'd be all over the place. You'd be sort of having to steer against it and rescue it as it sort of skipped around, which was quite good fun. As far as the control goes, if you push the trigger away from you, it goes into a brake, and if you then push it again, it goes into reverse. And the brake works really nicely. You can see the suspension work as it really comes down. So I found a nice little sort of slalom course here, which I did first in low speed, and this was all very controllable and quite nice. Again, this little car's having no problem with a bit longer grass and leaves and just, you know, generally stuff in the way. So then I decided to put it into high speed to see how that would be, and it completely overshot my mark going in this really deep grass. I thought it was going to get absolutely stuck there, but instead it just powered on through. I was really impressed. I mean, I've used other little cars before, and as soon as you put them in that sort of grass, it's like not got a chance. This thing was just like, yep, let me at it. It just ate it up. Obviously it slowed it down, but it was still great to see. And yeah, I still crashed it. You can find any old place, really, and you can fathom out a way of having some fun and finding new little bits to drive around and things. It's all cool. Certainly didn't have any problems with hills. So after doing a few batteries around the park, I decided it needed a little bit more of a torture test, as it were. So I took it out to sometimes where I go up flying, and it's got some, you know, really dirt and gravel roads just around the trees, and, you know, it's been raining, it's windy, it's been awful weather, which is why I haven't been flying, and just the right sort of place to see how this will hold up to a little bit of worse conditions. So I took it out and I found a few places just to drive it around and see how it would go. And I really enjoyed this sort of driving condition. I mean, I'm not aiming for the puddles. It's just as this thing sort of skips along, it changes directions, and then you have to counter steer. And sometimes I could do this, and other times it just veered madly off course, all over the place. But yeah, it was fun, and it just made short work of these roads or paths. And just like, yeah, it's a puddle, so what? Who cares? And lastly, while I was out, I found this spot and I thought, I wonder how it's going to do here. This is really deep and thick sort of leaves and twigs and branches. If you stand on it, you sort of sink down a bit. And so I thought, this is not going to have a chance here. But it just kept going. I mean, when it got back, I had to pull out twigs and leaves and all sorts from it. But fact was, it was just, yeah, whatever. It ate it up. It just carried on. And this is how it looked after that battery was done. It was wet everywhere. There was mud and wetness. But, you know, it all carried on just working. Amazing. So that was a lot of fun. It was just a good laugh just to drive around. And normally I always think, oh, how am I going to FPV something to make it better? And with this, you kind of didn't need to, because it was just fun watching it. And FPV on this sort of stuff doesn't necessarily work very well because, of course, the thing bounces around everywhere, so you're just going to feel quite ill all that time. Now, I put it through one hell of a torture test, and as such, we actually got a little bit of dampness in the battery compartment. Now, I wouldn't say we had water exactly, but we had definite moisture around certain parts of this. So, I mean, obviously I took it through puddles, I managed to crash it upside down and stuff. So I wanted to just understand what it meant by waterproofing, because it depends which pitch you look at. There's lots of them saying this is waterproof, but you can see there's some little gaps in here. There's under here, there's a hole where the servo arm comes out. So it's not waterproof. And when I looked at what the rating meant, it's called IPX4 is the water resistant thing, and that means that splashes
won't hurt it, but you can't submerge it in water or put it under like water jets. That will basically get in there. So from doing all of that, you know, I had a little bit of dampness in my battery bay, but I opened this up to check it out and I didn't have anywhere else. So just be wary that it might say waterproof, but basically it means you can drive it around wet areas. And it even says in the manual about if you're going through puddles, make sure it doesn't come up over here, because basically it will flood. There's enough holes there where things can get in. But aside from that, it handled very nicely. I'm holding this here because this was all obviously covered in water and mud, and cleaning it's really just a case of like wiping this down. If you've got bits of, you know, stuff stuck behind here, I just waited till it was dry and I take an old toothbrush, same as I use on a quad really, and just brush the stuff out, and it's all good to go again. So yeah, I'm fairly happy with the resilience of this and how it holds up to torture. I mean, these things, although tough, and I crashed it and cartwheeled it a bunch of times, if they're going to break, and I know by watching other YouTube channels such as RC Sparks, who I've been subscribed to for years, does loads of stuff on cars, really high spec, expensive ones, and if he's going to break something, it's normally, let's take this off again, it's normally along the sort of suspension or these arms here, where you're coming down on a wheel, and that's obviously all that weight through this area. So if there's something that's going to break, it's probably going to be one of these things. So I was a little bit concerned about, okay, if you did break it, what would you do? Fortunately, in the manual, there's a full breakdown of all the parts used in the manual, as well, which is very handy as well if you're taking it apart, some exploded diagrams of how things come together and what each of the parts is. So should you break something or need a spare, then you can get these things. Now, I noted Gearbest, who supplied this, thanks Gearbest, weren't doing the spares, but all you have to do is put the part number into Google and you will find other places where you can get hold of these things. So if there's anything I didn't like about it, it's mainly little fiddly things that I didn't like. I don't like the fact that, like, to turn it on, I have to unclip this, take this out, turn the switch on, and then put the thing back on and put the clips in and then be able to actually drive it. I mean, that's probably common with all RC cars, but it felt a bit of a faff to me. And I didn't like the fact this had a Dean's connector, because I've got a million batteries with other connectors. I mean, I could change these over obviously, but you know, it would be nicer to have a little bit more of a larger battery bay. This is a very specific size, so it's going to be quite difficult to fit a different battery. Again, these are parts that you can order, so you can get the same sort of battery, but weirdly, battery shipping from like China seems difficult unless you buy it as part of a car, in which case they seem happy to ship it to you. But there you go, lots of fun, cheap, great for kids, and if you're just, you know, driving it through like wet grass and stuff, it's no big deal. If you're going to go through big puddles and mud, just be aware that it will take a certain amount before that water will start doing something to it. Unfortunately, this has not got the snappiest name. It's simply called the 9125 from XinLeHong Toys, and it was supplied for review from Gearbest, thanks Gearbest, and of course you can see links down below where you can check it out on the product page. But for now, I hope that's been helpful, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.